All right, hello everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar titled Social Advocacy, How to Get Your Employees to Tell Your Story. My name is Laura Conserata and I'm the Marketing Manager here at De Facto Technologies, and I will be hosting the webinar today. And again, thank you so much for joining us. So I want to quickly introduce our speakers. We are joined today by Stuart Maister, who's the Chief Storyteller at Strategic Narrative, as well as Lucas Shear, who's the President of Products and Innovation here at De Facto. So before we get started, I do have a few housekeeping notes. Our formal presentation today will run for approximately 30 minutes or so. And then following that, we've left lots of time for question and answer period. So if you do have questions throughout the presentation, I welcome you to ask them in the question box or in the chat pane in your GoToWebinar window. We will address them at the Q&A session at the very end of the presentation, but feel free to post them in there for now. Following Q&A, we will be closing down, but we will also be sharing a recorded version of this webinar. It will be made available on YouTube, and we'll be sure to share that link with you shortly following the presentation via email as well. So without further ado, I would like to hand things over to Stuart, who's going to get us started.
Thank you very much, Laura. Really appreciate it. And hello, everybody. I'm going to kick things off, and Lucas from De Facto is going to come in a little bit further down. We'll talk in a minute about the agenda. Just a very brief introduction. You can hear from my accent I'm English. I'm actually based in London, the UK. I am a former television and radio reporter. I've worked for 20 years now with lots of different organizations on their storytelling, and I help them really get their story right when they're making changes, when they're introducing new initiatives, when they're introducing new products, or indeed, in this case, helping them get their organization as a whole to tell their story more effectively. So that's who I am. This is what we're going to run through, a bit about social advocacy. You kind of know what it is, I'm sure, but we just want to reiterate what that is. Really then about what you do about it, how to develop a framework to enable it in your organization, how to support that. And then Lucas is going to talk about Sparrow, which is a phenomenal platform for social advocacy and how that works. And then we'll have, as Laura said, plenty of time for Q&A. So let's just talk about social advocacy. So this is social storytelling, right? This is, none of this, as ever, is new. Nothing is new under the sun, right? People who work with you, for you, have always gone out and talked about you. And always will do. They do it there, they do it there, and they do it there. So of course this employee here is sitting in her workplace, and she may be chatting to friends anywhere in the world. She may be broadcasting to thousands of people, or she may be doing a very important work email. We just don't know. And that's really the context for this whole conversation. It's a totally blended world. The whole thing has been mushed up into a blended world of communication. Part of that world is the communication done by your employees, and what we want to do is make sure that adds to the reputation of your business in what they do and say. So our mission in social advocacy, and our mission of what we're going to try and talk about in the next half an hour or so, and then do Q&A, is to encourage, enable, and empower this employee to tell her stories in a way that promotes the messages we'd love to see out there. And as you'll see, my strong belief is that we have to focus that into a few areas, because I strongly believe less is more. Otherwise, all that's happening is noise is being created, and want to avoid that. Now, the world once was very simple, wasn't it? Where different communications disciplines in your organization had very clear functions. As you can see there, the marketing guys just focused on talking to customers. The PR corporate comms were engaged with the various publics they felt were important to build the reputation of the firm. If you're an internal communications, or your internal communications team spoke to employees, and investor relations spoke to investors. And those were fairly hermetically sealed communications channels. So everyone talked about control of the message. The marketing guys could craft beautiful messages, advertising, other forms of communication to customers, and have pretty certainty that that message, those communications would reach the customers only. And the same would apply in all those other areas. And that's why you could say different things actually to different people, because fundamentally there was not that much leakage. Now, of course, the world has completely changed. That blended, mashed up world. It's all gone into the blender. Not only are customers also employees, they're also members of the public, they're investors, but of course, they're all communicating with each other. They're not just in receive mode anymore. They being us, you, me, everyone else. We're no longer just in receive mode of messages from the corporation, from the company, the organization. We're in broadcast mode too. And so the idea of control has disappeared. Very few people, I hope, still talk about controlling the message. Just as there's a whole conversation taking place in the way you lead organizations away from command and control towards a greater level of empowerment, of course, this goes hand in hand with the communication flow that takes place. And so that's why, I mean, that's actually the foundation of my business strategic narrative. I believe very strongly there needs to be one core narrative that organizations have that is consistent across all those different audiences and those different groups of people, and that are given life indeed by those different people. And that's really the point of this. We're here today largely talking about employees, but what we're going to discuss could be true of any one of those groups, if I'm honest with you, because each one of them will be communicating about your business. And so again, we want to create frameworks which make it easier for them to do so in a way that promotes the things we'd love them to say. For me, this is the key slide. If nothing else, I would say this is kind of the big idea. The big idea is that business is jazz, not classical music. What do I mean by that? I mean that in classical music is very structured and controlled, and everyone is coordinated. They have to be. Jazz is very different, of course. Jazz enables improvisation on people to riff on themes. That not only do we want that to happen, it's going to happen anyway. So we need to harness that. Here's the point though. If a group is playing Round Midnight, which is a great jazz tune, I'm sure many of you know, it's different from when they're playing Take 5, which is another great jazz tune. The same jazz band playing those two different tunes, even though it's the same people involved, will play a different tune, even though they might improvise and riff, because there is a tune at the center of it. There is a tune, there is a fundamental structure to what they're doing. They're able to be free in the way they express themselves musically, but within a tune, within a set of ideas that someone's laid down that gives it structure. And that's really what I think is the model for social advocacy, that we want to write a tune that our employees, our colleagues can riff on, that they can improvise on, that they can build their own tunes around, but that is a recognizable tune at the center of it. It is your organization, not another organization that they're riffing on. And I think that's a powerful way to approach it. And if you do that, you get a tune, you get something that's pleasurable. If you don't do that, if you don't create a structure for it, what you end up with is noise, because everyone's just playing whatever they fancy all at the same time. So we want to have a core narrative at the center of this jazz that our employees are going to be playing. Let me talk a little bit about the power of a narrative, power of simple storytelling. Don't need to elaborate too much on this, I don't think. Every religion, every faith has at its heart a few key simple ideas that, because they're simple and clear, are more easily communicated, and people riff on those tunes within any one of those religions. They have their own take on it. They draw their own conclusions from it. But the tune is recognizably one or other of those faiths. You know, the same is true with money and credit. It's all a fiction. It's just a story. Money doesn't really exist. Credit is a fiction. It's a fiction that people choose to believe. So we all know that a bank doesn't have 90% of the money that it lends out to people. It doesn't exist in any form whatsoever. It's just numbers on a computer screen these days, and previously numbers on pieces of paper. Nevertheless, because there is an agreed narrative around that, a story that everyone's bought into, that credit turns into change in the real world. The same is true in your organization. Your organization is fundamentally based on an agreed story that everyone buys into, and therefore can act upon that. And if any of you have read this book, *Sapiens*, which was a bestseller a couple of years ago, you'll know what I'm talking about here, because this guy Yuval Harari makes the point. He says that the only difference between Homo sapiens, human beings, and actually monkeys 30,000 years ago when we were on the savannah, was that we developed the ability to tell stories and monkeys didn't. Other than that, we're exactly the same. Genetically, almost identical, as we know. So the difference was this ability and storytelling, creating a clear narrative, creating a story that people understand, is the secret to everything that's happened since, because people creating a story that can move millions because they all buy into that story is the whole history of humankind. And that is as true now for you and your organization as it is for the country you live in and the money in your pocket. So we're trying to shape this story that is told, and social advocacy is the increasing component, the content of that story that's being told out there. That's why we want it to be a story, not many, many, many different stories. Now, this is a newspaper called The Sun we have here in the UK. Some of you may or may not have heard of it. And I think this is the formula for storytelling. It's brilliant. Because what The Sun does, its formula is simple. We don't know what the story is going to be tomorrow in this. We don't know what the story is going to be next week. We know how it's going to be told. And the formula is simple. There is a headline which tells you the story, in this case, in 2 words, but with they've supplemented it with a little sub-clause there to explain a bit more. But actually, if you knew the story at the time in this country, you'd kind of get that story. But what you really want to do is read the 100 words in the box on the bottom right-hand corner there, which gives you a bit more of the story. And you could stop there, and that would be, you'd have as much as you need to know about that story. But for Sun readers, the people they're trying to reach, they want them to want to turn to pages 4 and 5 and get the full details of this story. And that's true of every story they put on their front page. So they're taking people on a journey through the story. They're piquing their interest, telling them the story, but then in a way that means they want to find out more information. And this is the formula for storytelling, as you'll see. And this, I want to play this to you for 2 reasons. This is both my suggested formula to you for how you tell the story of change within your organization, maybe the change in which you're going to encourage people to be advocates for the organization in the way they use their social media and so on. So, as it were, the change program within the organization, but also the way in which you then provide content to people in order for them to tell that story. So that formula is, I've represented in what I call the news pyramid, which is a headline, the story, that's that box on the front page of The Sun, but in the case of our story that we're trying to tell, it might be a few sentences to sum up the content of what we want to say, what you say when people ask. And then we're going to, the detail is what I call the narrative themes, the big ideas that we want people to talk about. We want them to riff on these themes, and I'm going to discuss how we develop those themes. And underneath that is the evidence, the facts, the figures that people can draw on to support the story that we want them to tell. So those are kind of the elements of our story. So how do we do this? I'm now going to go through a structure of how you develop these narrative themes, develop a framework within which people can be social advocates for your business, which they can tell stories on behalf of the organization using all of the different social media in this blended world. The first question, we can do this in a structured way, is to ask ourselves who. Now, when I say who, I mean who are the people that we want to now be our social advocates? In other words, who are our staff? Who are our colleagues? I'm sure you've gone through this exercise for any internal communication strategy, but for the purposes of this, you'll see why it's important to ask the question again. Don't just spray and pray. Don't just say, throw out stories, please share this, please share that. We need to, we're now in many ways involved in a marketing exercise. We're trying to engage the attention of the people we work with in a way that works for them. So let's ask ourselves who they are. And this will vary. So for example, if a very high proportion of your staff, of your colleagues are high-level consultants, they're out there consulting with firms, then that's important to realize, because the nature of the content we're going to ask them to share, they're going to be interested in sharing, will of course be different potentially than if the demographics of our colleagues is different, supposing they're largely call center staff, for example. So really be clear on the internal market that we have for this content that we want people to share and advocate and use, and stories we want them to tell on our behalf. So breaking down the audience, being clear on the audience is important. And then asking, when we think about who they are, given that we're encouraging them to be advocates, in other words, to do something they don't have to do for their job, we have to ask ourselves who they want to reach, who they want to impress. So again, if we think about, for example, our high-level consultants, if that's what our business is, a lot of high-level consultants out there, then we're obviously thinking about the clients that they're trying to engage and who those clients are, what they're interested in. If, on the other hand, we've got a massive field force, maybe our colleagues are largely drivers in trucks, for example, and we know who are the people they're communicating with, who's their audience. Mapping this out really provides a very powerful context for an ongoing advocacy campaign. And then we want to think about this audience. What do we want them to feel? What do we want them to know? What do we want them to do? So you might want to say, it's obvious what we want them to do. We want them to talk about the organization in a positive way. Actually, it may be more than that. We may want them to promote specific things. We may want them not to do something, not to be very active, or we may want them to talk only about specific things. We want to be clear about what we want them to do, but we want them to feel and know. Now, the reason for that is, of course, the two reasons people do things are, number one, through emotion, and I'm sure you all know about the monkey brain and all the behavioral economic stuff around people making decisions on emotion and then rationalizing on the rational side of their brain. So what do we want them to feel? What's the emotion? Do we want them to feel excited about a firm? Do we want them to feel proud? Do we want them to feel that they're empowered? You know, what are the things that we want to feel? And it's worth writing all these words on a board. And I run workshops around this. I get people to write every word like that. And a lot of the obvious words come up, and then some other ones come up that are more particular, perhaps, to the organization. Maybe we want to feel calm about things. We want to feel reassured. You know, there are lots and lots of trust, all sorts of things like that. And what do we want to know? What are the things we need them to know? This is the rational side, why they choose to share some of this information. When we write all these words on a board in a workshop, it's great, because at the end of it, what I then ask people to do is to circle all the people in the room, each to choose 3 of those words that they feel, only 3. And that's difficult, because you end up with loads and loads of words that you want, and then you have to narrow it down to 3. And it's then very interesting to see which are the most popular 3 in each of those columns: feel, know, and do. And it starts creating a kind of heat map of the sort of energy we're trying to create, the communication we want to do, and the narrative we're trying to build. If it's an exciting narrative, or if it's actually all about reassurance, and depending on the nature of the firm, stability, or it may be about the nature of being of the future, talking about stories of the future. I want to feel that this is a future facing narrative we're building rather than a current one. So it leads you in different directions. It's a powerful exercise. The next question we're asking ourselves in building this narrative framework. So we've asked ourselves, who exactly are we engaging with? Who do they want to engage with? What do we want to feel, know, and do? Now we're asking the big why question. So there are two parts to this. And firstly, why them? In other words, what is going on? What is their agenda? What do they care about? Start with them. What do they want to do? For example, in the case of what we're discussing here, do they want to look great to their friends? Is it as simple as that? They want to look good to their friends and cool. They want to work for a really cool company, or maybe they work for a company that is a kind company. Maybe that's their why. They want to look good. Maybe their why is they're trying to build their career. So it's very career-oriented content that they will use and share. That's mostly what they're trying to do. Are they in a job or are they in a career? That's always a very good starting question of things. Obviously, different employees will be in different categories. What else is going on in their world that they care about that we can go with the grain of? And the second question is the kind of the Simon Sinek question. If you've seen his stuff on TED, is why us? What's our purpose in this? What are we trying to achieve? So it's very important, I think, when you ask yourself this why question, why are we encouraging and engaging in developing this social advocacy program we're trying to develop, is to link it back to the vision, the purpose of the organization, what the organization stands for. It's got to be grounded in something very solid. By the way, if your organization doesn't have that well articulated, doesn't have a core narrative that incorporates that stuff, please do contact me, because that's something I spend a lot of my life doing with organizations. It's very exciting work because it really gets to the heart of what makes your organization special, different, great, different from the other guys in the same market that you're in. So there's a why question for your organization, and then it comes, and then in the context of what we're discussing here, which is a social advocacy program, why are we doing this? What do we want to achieve from it? What are the outcomes we're looking for? What's our motivation? Is it just to flog more? Is it just to sell more stuff? Is that really what we're trying to do? Is it building a reputation? With whom? For what purpose? Is it because we're trying to do good in the world and we want certain good things to get out there that will promote that vision that we have for how we can help the world or help particular groups of people? Just really get this stuff out there. It's really important to then feed into the narrative. Now, we're kind of talking, if you like, about the people. Now, let's think about us as an organization. How do we do what we do that makes us special? This is such a powerful question. It's usually where the points of difference are between you and the other guys in your market. So I'll give you an example. If you're a law firm, if I asked you what do you do? You say, well, we do law. We have expertise in law. We help people tackle legal issues. Well, so does everyone else. Everyone else does the same thing. But how do you do it that makes you distinctive or that plays to your strengths? So it may be, for example, I was working with one law firm. We had this whole discussion, and it turned out the big distinctive thing about them was the way they rewarded their partners. And it was very distinctive. They changed. It was very different from some of the other big firms that they competed with, because the way they rewarded their partners encouraged a much more collegiate approach to solving problems, which was to the benefit of their clients. And that wasn't a story they were telling. So if I asked them what they did, they sounded like all the other guys. If I asked them how they did it, how they organized themselves, that became the nugget that that gave us some really powerful hows. Often when you ask people how they do what they do, they talk about our great people, that we really care about what we do. And that may be true, but it may also sound like everyone else as well. So try and dig deeper than that if you can. You may have had some big hows or big themes handed down from on high. These are our we're going to talk about smart cities. Right, that's the big thing we'll talk. But how are we approaching smart cities as an issue? What is our particular take on that? And this is going to drive into the themes that we want people to communicate, because what we're trying to do with our social advocacy is demonstrate what's special, different, great about our organization, or indeed our products, or the way we do things around here. And I always think it's really interesting to. The other thing to talk about is what we do, and it may seem such a bleeding obvious question. What do we do? What do we sell? What do we make? What do we produce? Actually, it often leads to some interesting answers when you really look at it. What do we sell? For example, let me give you an example. What does a dentist sell? Now, if you ask a dentist what he or she does, they provide dental services. They can talk great detail, I'm sure, if you wanted them to, about the technical aspects of dentistry, about the tools they use, or about the things that they do, fix fillings or whatever it is. That's what they might think they're selling. Actually, it's not what they're selling. Because what do you buy when you go to a dentist? You don't buy any of those things. What you're buying is one of a few things. You're buying removal of pain. You're buying clean teeth and fresh breath. You're buying maybe just an insurance that you're not going to have pain by having a checkup. So what you're buying is often not what people think they're selling. So really think about what you're selling, what people are buying, leads again to changing the story that you want to tell to the people you're trying to reach. And now we're going to develop the first draft of this story. Now, when I say the story, well, let me just be clear what I'm talking about here. Because I said this is jazz, so there are going to be many stories that are going to form the content of our social advocacy program. Many, many, many stories, and we have no control of them. We're just trying to create a series of themes that people will riff on, a series of ideas. But this is the story, I would suggest, of your program, of your change program that we're developing here, the change that may be empowering people to become more active social advocates. So for who? For the people that, let's call out the people that we're trying to reach, why they should do this, why they should care, how you're going to do this, how you're going to make this happen, and what exactly you're going to do. So this is kind of calling out the story of your program. This actually is not a bad little template for any story you want to tell, whether it's the narrative of your business, or a big change program that you're doing. These really, really simple journalistic questions, they're so simple that they're very complicated, because if they're answered properly, they lead to a lot of complex answers. But the themes that we're going to develop, themes that we're going to ask people to riff on, that we're going to ask people to be advocates around. This is a simple formula. I mean, obviously, it's, again, when you get into a specific example, it gets more complicated than that. But as an approach, as a framework, simple framework, we know who we're engaging with. We know their whys, what they care about, the things they're trying to do. And we can call out the hows of our organization, what makes us special, different, great. And that bit in the middle, the hows, that the way we do things, where we can match it with the whys, why people care. And that's how we can develop the key themes that we want people to communicate around. Again, we're not controlling the message, we're creating themes that they can riff on. And then that comes back to that news pyramid that we talked about earlier. But I want to really move to this, which is building the story. So now, what are we going to produce that people can use? None of this will be unfamiliar to you. Nothing is new under the sun, right? This is a framework for how you develop this narrative, then what are you giving people to tell these individual stories? Well, it comes back to that Sun formula. We're giving them a headline, if you like, a simple idea that they can tweet. We're giving them a format, a story, 100, 150 words, maybe with images or other content they can use that can be shared easily and quickly in social media. But they can develop in their own way. What are the other manifestations of this? This is something I just want to mention to you because it may be that this story that we're telling that riffs on one of these themes can be turned into a sales slide in presentations that we can use. It's not just about storytelling. This is also about, can be used in other forms to influence selling. And then finally, a kit of parts. Now, if any of you work or have worked in PR, you know that we talk about a media kit, which you send out to the media. Same internally. If we're going to encourage people to be social advocates, we're trying to do the same thing. It's exactly the same process in many ways as a PR person is trying to do with a journalist. They're trying to encourage that journalist of their own volition to take their story and run with it, package it in the way that works for that journalist with their own spin on it, their own take on it, but with content often provided by the organization, photos, maybe video, a top line story, facts, maybe even write the thing for them. That happens increasingly in PR, and of course it can happen increasingly in. But actually, what you really want in life, in a social media world, you really want the employee to take this and run with it in their own words, in their own way, and then bang on those themes consistently, the same themes over and over and over again, where you on a few themes. And that's the way you cut through the noise surrounding all the people you're trying to reach by having the same few ideas coming up again and again and again through your official communication. And if you like, what we're now talking about, which is the unofficial communication, which employees and others can use with the people they're trying to reach. So let me just move that on. So how do you do that? Well, one way you do that is to have a brilliant platform that blends these different external platforms for you. And with that, let me hand over to Lucas, who will take you through this section.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. Thanks for the great segue. I really just wanted to talk about this really briefly. I really, from your presentation here, I really love the theme throughout of empowering versus control, and that was really at the core of our thinking when we created this suite of products that we call Sparrow. We were thinking, how do we create a channel that really empowers organizations to riff on these themes, and then easily share those that you choose to with the outside world. So, Stuart was talking about this concept of an advocacy kit, and a lot of companies are doing things like deploying intranets internally, and have seen many challenges with that. How can you? We talked about this idea of blended communications on mobile devices these days. How can you leverage the potential power of that to promote your own brand and to improve your own internal communications? So including mobile channels in what you're doing, and the analytics to continuously improve what it is that you're doing. And so Sparrow, without going into all of the details about Sparrow, it's really this platform where you can publish out these communications, where following that same pattern, where you're piquing interest with the headline and the image, grabbing people's attention with the little blurb, and then telling the story in more detail in the content of your articles, and empowering your employees to actually identify what it is that they're interested in, and creating a more engaging experience that way. But if we jump to the next slide, you can see we've created also a way to have that social advocacy or that advocacy platform that we've been speaking of here. So that ability to share those narratives and those individual stories and topics that you're publishing out to your employees with their own social networks and allowing them to create their own spin on it. There is some level of control on what you choose to publish to the outside world. That's a common question that we get. Obviously, not everything that you publish to your internal employees you want them promoting on their Facebook page, for example. But so we have that control around at the individual story level what you can actually publish. But otherwise, empowering those users to say, as you can, share this article on their Facebook page and give their own thoughts on it, as really your most powerful tool to share that narrative again with the outside world. So with that, we'd love to open. We've left lots of time to open this up to questions. Any questions from the audience?
Can I just come in on something while people are posing questions? To pick up on something Lucas was saying there, which I think is a really interesting point, which is that this kind of division between official, what one might call official published content by you, and the inverted commas unofficial content that's produced by employees. So one of the questions for you is, for you, if you're internal communications or HR or communications, is, do you only want employees to share stuff that you have pre-packaged, or do you want them, as I suggested, to riff on themes or to be empowered to do their own thing, but choose to incorporate content that you've shared with them? That's a really interesting question. My own view is the latter, because that's the way the world is, because they're going to anyway, privately or publicly. But the other thing about that is that content produced by employees might then feed back into content that you can leverage as a firm. So, for example, if an employee does some really cool, interesting post, you might share it on the official firm Twitter feed or LinkedIn feed or Facebook feed, whatever, because they've come up with some interesting take on something, and it's got some energy to it because it's genuine and authentically from someone in the business, not, as it were, been crafted by a committee of 10 people and approved by the CEO before it went out. And everyone knows what that stuff looks like, and they don't believe it as much. So this kind of official, unofficial content, in my view, is one of those other areas in life that's should become more blended, unless the lines between them should become very fuzzy. Indeed, not to say potentially invisible.
If I can, while we're still collecting questions, if I can ask, a question kind of on behalf of, a lot of our past customers. One challenge that, we hear a lot from our customers is that often, even in large organizations of, even 10, 20,000 plus people, there's often very small group of people that are actually responsible for internal communications and external communications within the organization. Stuart, do you have any thoughts on it? And sorry, I didn't prep you with this question in advance. I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but do you have any thoughts on, for organizations like that, how is there any way that they can leverage that unstructured sort of source of storytelling that you're describing with the employees to improve the quality and quantity of the content that they're pushing out there?
Well, I think absolutely, and it's the answer is actually in some ways in the question. So, and that's, I have to say, and this isn't me just saying that, that's why Sparrow as a platform for me is so absolutely brilliant, because it becomes a practical way to enable this to happen. In other words, if the only internal communications that happens is done by those with the title internal communications in their job title, the words internal communication in the job title, then as you say, that's a very, very severe limit on what can happen. And that, again, that worked in a world in which everyone was trying to tightly control the internal communication to one channel, so everyone got the same message. If we all accept that world has gone, it's disappeared. I mean, if you look at the way marketing now seeks to harness the energy and the views and the ideas even of their customers, that they open up the conversation with customers and dialogue and encourage customers to run with the ideas that they generate. Most marketing now is designed to create a big idea that is amplified and multiplied through social media by the people that find it interesting and fun. The same applies in internal communication, exactly the same thing, that we're trying to almost plant seeds as internal communicators that can grow and flourish in ways that we hadn't anticipated through platforms like Sparrow, where people can take and run with it and do different things with it, share it externally, and are motivated to do so because they look good to their friends and colleagues. So absolutely, the internal communicators should see themselves as seed planters increasingly, as people who are pushing, creating a framework, creating, as I say, themes, but that they need to facilitate and enable their colleagues to be the internal communicators and run with these ideas and do more with it.
Yeah, great, thanks. And sorry, go ahead, Laura.
No, I was just saying we have a question that's come through, but I'll let you finish off, Lucas.
Yeah, sorry. Just I don't want to monopolize the question time. I just find that concept interesting. Just for those customers, that I was describing, Sparrow's a good digital channel for what you're describing. Are there other channels, even informally, that you would highlight to to our customers that are sort of facing that challenge?
Well, I think you come back to some traditional internal communications challenges, the frozen cascade and all of that. In other words, where, however much we're in the digital world, most employee surveys still talk about the importance of their communication with their immediate boss, face to face. All of that is still obviously critical, massively critical. And so their impression of their firm is still often going to be determined in large part by the relationship with the boss that they have. As ever with any discussion about internal communications, there are cultural issues here. For example, if we're in a culture of an organization that empowers staff to be advocates, then that affects actually the way in which the internal conversations need to take place. And so, this is, although we're talking here about the digital world, which is the world that's changed this relationship because of the openness of communication, actually affects the physical world as well.
Great, thanks, Stuart.
Okay, so we have a question that's come through, and I'll give this one to Stuart. When you're empowering employees to advocate socially, there's potential for them to say negative things. Should you control that, and how do you recommend doing so?
Yeah. Well, that's a really good question, and it's a key question, isn't it? Because so it comes back to something I said right at the beginning. There's always been that potential. There always is. That is, whatever you do as an organization, that potential exists because of this world in which everyone is a broadcaster. Everyone has the power to reach lots and lots of people. Okay, so that potential exists anyway, whatever you do or say. So it comes back to this control issue. My view is that it depends on what negative is. So if some of the stuff that gets out there is a little bit negative, or it reveals weakness in the firm, or that can be a very endearing thing. It shows humanity. We're not perfect. We'd love to think we're perfect. We're not, because no one really is. No one believes you if you say you are. So here's an imperfection here that's been highlighted. We're going to really, we're picking up on this. This is really useful to know. It can be that sort of thing. However, if it's really severe stuff, if it's absolutely criticizing the firm or undermining the reputation of the firm, then that should be breaching some protocols that you obviously need to have and will have in your firm about what you can and can't say about the company. So I think having protocols about that create some boundaries are important for that exact reason. And that's reasonable, and everyone understands that. That's very different from closing down what people can and can't say unless it's shiningly positive. Which, again, in a world in which we've all seen that no one's perfect, no one is perfect. Everyone's a little bit cynical about everyone, every organisation, whether it's government, the media, or the organisation you work for. Showing a little bit of weakness is not necessarily a bad thing in my view. So that's a question of judgment.
Fantastic. Okay, well, thank you very much again, everyone, for joining us today. Once again, this webinar will be made available on YouTube and will be shared with you all via email. You'll receive a link within the next day or so. Thank you again very much to Stuart as well as to Lucas for joining us today on the call. It was really great to hear from you guys. And if anyone has any questions, our contact information is available at the end of this presentation. We will send the slide deck to you as well. But you're welcome to check Stuart out at strategicnarrative.com or as well check out and learn more about Sparrow at defacto.com. So thank you again for joining us, everyone, and have a wonderful day.